Hello and welcome to Gin with Gwynne. I'm Oliver Gwynne, and this is where I give you my off-the-cuff and unrehearsed thoughts on marketing data and philosophy. Although this week there's like a presentation, and yeah, it's kind of more rehearsed than normal, to be honest. In my life as someone who works for a data agency, I need to understand businesses very, very quickly. I need to understand the drivers, the blockers, the funnel, and how those business operate very quickly because my day-to-day life is literally going from like e-commerce to dating apps to two-sided marketplaces within an hour. And so I need to try and understand the customer journey very quickly, but also the levers that the business can sort of pull. And so I came up with an idea of how to do that. Cool. So where does value live? We need to understand how businesses operate and the levers that they can pull to affect change in data. That's what we're really aiming towards doing. And so I've come up with a framework called the six levers, and you could argue that within there's many others, and I'm sure there's some things that I've forgotten about, but this is a framework that you can apply to just help you consider the practicalities and the context of our clients, or if you're in the data world, your clients. Every business has these six levers. So the first is total addressable market. So who can actually buy from you? The second is conversion. So how many people decide to buy from you? The third is cost to serve or profit margin. I would also put leverage in here. So what does it cost to deliver them? What is the risk that you're taking in serving that audience? Next is frequency, how often that customer returns. The next one is offering, which you could argue that frequency is a part of offering, but some have frequency sort of not built into them. So what do you charge? What do you sell? How do you package that offering? And last is capacity. So what's the hard upper limit and what you can actually serve? So I'm going to go through all of these in turn, and throughout this, you'll see that I'm using a restaurant just as an example because it's something that we can all easily think about. So for all of these areas, when we're thinking about them, there's sort of opportunities, there's dependencies, there's risks in changing it, and there's also areas where data can help. So in terms of total addressable market, the sort of things that you can't change if you are a restaurant is what is the local population density? How much do they earn? What are your competitors? And in some places, it's very bad if there's like 5 Chinese restaurants. You don't necessarily want to be the 6th Chinese restaurant. And in other places, it could be good if you have less competition. Retail is a really interesting example of this. So you would think, hey, I'm the only shoe shop. Everybody who wants shoes will come to me. But it doesn't actually work like that. If there's 2 or 3 shoe shops, it's much more likely that people will make the trip out to a physical retail store because they've got more options, and then you'll be one of 3. If you're just a sole one and they don't want to go there and be disappointed, then they're less likely to do it. So actually having competition nearby can be a good thing in many locations. And obviously, if we're thinking about Chinese food, Chinatown, there's an entire area that is known for that and has loads of very similar restaurants serving very similar food, but it draws people in. And so sometimes having competition locally to you can actually be a good thing. In terms of opportunities, you have your physical restaurant, but you've also got deliveries that you can think about. There's also new occasions that you can start to think about. If you're just doing dinner and you're just doing lunch, then maybe you want to think about brunch or after work events and all that kind of stuff. And data can help you as well. Think about your total addressable market. So postcode analysis of your current customers, search demand for cuisine nearby, competitor density mapping. For a restaurant, you're tied to a physical location most of the time. Even for delivery drivers or delivery-based businesses or kitchen-based businesses, that's also true. And so in the world of SaaS tools and internet products, it might seem as though your total addressable market is huge. And I put one of the main risks here is overestimating the reach that you've really got, because even if theoretically you could serve customers from all over the world, that's not always the case because there'll be language barriers. There might be a higher cost to serve. There might be legalities in doing that. And so overestimating your reach is really important. And of course, you also have to think about yourself in the context of the industry narrative that you are playing in. You might be a small business that does something, but if there's a million other businesses that are much more established than you and they've got lots of case studies, then you're always going to be struggling against them. Yes, theoretically, I could land Coca-Cola as a client, but realistically, I've not dealt with enterprise clients on that scale and in that space. Next, conversion. So often when I'm thinking about businesses, I'm thinking about the customer journey. And that's really only two questions, which is how can you get higher value customers in? And then how can you keep them longer? But conversion here, again, you've got dependencies on that. If you're a restaurant, your dependencies might be things that are outside of your control, like how many reviews do you have? Are they positive? Are they negative? How well do you show up on social media? Physical location visibility, even if you've got the best website and you're all over social media, if people can't find your restaurant, then that's probably a problem. Risks here, of course, is high cost per acquisition. All of the channels are getting more and more expensive every year. And if you are dependent on a few sources for most of your income, that's a bad thing for any business. But there's also opportunities. You can build referral loops from your existing customer. You can partner with local offices for lunch, for example. And of course, you own your own Google profile and photo, so you've got some sort of control about how do you present yourself to the world and how do you optimize that conversion. And where could data help there? Well, tracking where customers heard from you, optimizing towards lifetime value and not towards first-time purchases, as I've often talked about. Conversion can also be a blocker for a lot of businesses just because they can't realistically convert everybody that they serve. Pitching can take time and effort if you're in like a technical field like we are. All of these things can be actually a blocker to do. So if you're working on government tenders that go on for 6 and 8 and 10 months, you've got a longer burn time, you've got people who are potentially idle, all of those kind of dynamics are something that you can look at in conversion. Cost to serve / profit margin / leverage. So fairly self-explanatory. There's a lot of things that you don't have 100% control over. So supplier pricing and contracts, food for a restaurant in this case is going up in front of all of our eyes at the moment if you're in the UK. How efficient your staff are is something that in theory you can control, but there's only so far that you can push efficiency gains. And even if you make people 40% more efficient, which would be amazing, does that mean that you can realistically serve 40% more clients? Not necessarily. Opportunities, so you can engineer margin into your menu. For example, I know Rory Sutherland, I'm not going to claim credit for his thoughts, but he has this thing about wine glasses, and that when you go to a restaurant, there's a huge wine glass already there. It's not a drinks menu, it's a wine menu because the markup on wine is so big that they create a culture where it is expected that this is a place that serves wine. They find the most obscure wine and they have a heavy margin on that. And data should help here, a percentage of gross profit by dish, what items are dragging you down, actual versus theoretical food costs, because that can change on a week by week and day by day basis, it feels like at the moment, and labor cost as a percentage of revenue by day. Just to go back to this, actually, I think that people and businesses in general, they're not great at capturing their costs. They have that data typically, but it sits in like HR systems. They spend a lot of time on procurement for some reason, but they don't put all of those things in together to realize that, oh, actually the cost of onboarding a new client is 20 hours from this particular team and all that kind of stuff. And they don't factor that in all the time. So it's an area of data that I see that people need to get better at. Next is frequency. So it's important to bear in mind that frequency is often attributed to the type of business that you are. We need to buy milk on a weekly basis. We don't necessarily need to buy champagne on a weekly basis. Obviously, that's a daily buy. And frequency of a restaurant is often tied into your offering, of course. If you're a really expensive Michelin-starred restaurant, then maybe that's a special occasion. You're going to do that once a year. Something like McDonald's, maybe somebody will go there every single week of the year. And so there's dependencies there. There's things that you can control. So there's menu variety, there's seasonal changes. If you are hotel chocolate, you're going to sell less chocolate typically during the summer because it's too hot and chocolate melts. And that's why they also serve ice cream. But does that make up for all the chocolate that you can't sell? Probably not. There's a consistency built into most industries, and frequency can also affect not just customers, but if you're in a two-sided marketplace, when people are going to buy as well, and when people will offer things. And there's opportunities there, loyalty cards, app to track visits, seasonal menus that create urgency, email and SMS to lapse customers. And data can help you to understand the metrics of frequency, what the average is, and identify on a customer by customer basis when somebody breaks their normal habit and goes down, because habit formation is a really good sign for either churn or upselling. Next is your offering. So there's loads of stuff within this, but price, occasion fare, experience, availability, extras. If you're in a restaurant, spelling mistake there, but your dependencies are, if you're in a tiny little horrible restaurant, you're not going to be serving Michelin-star food. You have the capability of the kitchen staff and the skill mix there. If they are all amazing at doing fish dishes and you only serve Wagyu beef, then you might have a problem there. And then brand positioning and pricing is something that you can change, but it's something that you shouldn't be changing so frequently. It's something that needs to stick in the minds of customers, and it takes a long time, and you should be iterating rather than making wholesale changes, because with any change, there's a risk that you alienate your core audience. There's also a risk that your offering is too broad and it dilutes the quality. Price occasion mismatch, sort of fine dining prices on a takeaway menu, ignoring what competitors offer nearby as well, because if something is working, then why not steal it? Capacity is something that is often kind of not so obvious, especially in these digital projects or products even. So you might think, hey, I can click a button and I can serve a whole new market. But again, there might be legalities involved in that. It might be that moderation then needs to improve. You might need to translate your business and not just translate the product, but make it culturally relevant to the local people. Otherwise, you're not going to serve them as well, and they might churn quicker. I had a client that did that one time, and you might not get those people back. And of course, different places have different values attached to them, and so you might have to sell something cheaper to a different country than the one that you're currently serving in. Capacity looks like bottlenecks throughout your business, and capacity can be that your data team is too small and so you can't get insights quicker. It could be that your marketing team only has so much budget. Capacity is a really interesting thing to think about. One lever, or pulling one lever, always moves another. So in our restaurant example, I can raise prices by 20%, but by doing so, then there will be a larger amount of customers that are price sensitive and they might leave. I can add more seats to my restaurant, so I up my capacity. I can serve more people. But if it's very busy and crowded, then maybe people won't want to come in. And I can launch a new channel, so delivery or maybe catering to office parties and that kind of things. But that has a problem where Deliveroo takes commission, and then my business is on the back of somebody I'm not employing. And if they don't do a good job, then it reflects poorly on me. Why do these levers matter when we're thinking about insights? We are trying to provide actionable insights. Actionable insights are only actionable if clients can actually do them. To understand those actions, we need to understand the business context, and there's always going to be a gap, and that's okay. As an agency, we're just never going to know your business inside and out. Sometimes that's useful because we have an outside opinion on things. We look at the data, we can form a hypothesis that's not based on recent prejudice, but there's always going to be a gap where we're not going to know your business inside and out. And I would say there's also a gap for data people internally because they don't know the processes inside and out. They don't necessarily know like marketing inside and out and all that kind of thing. But thinking about business context is really important in making sure that your insight is actionable. So where data creates real value, you've got data, raw facts collected, then you turn it into insight, which is not always easy. It requires an automated process to do that on a regular basis. And from that, you can pattern or anomaly detection. After that, you want to think about decisions. So something I always talk about is that every decision should have data associated with it, and it should have a behavior associated with it. And if you think in terms of decisions, then you don't import data that you don't need. You make dashboards that are more relevant, and you need to think, what decision does this person need to make every single day, and how can I show them the data in a really obvious way? Because what I want from that decision is they take an action from it. And the problem often is that they don't take the right action if you don't give them the right data, or they don't know how to read the data. And from that action comes value. And for each of these levers, we can see how that would work. So for total addressable market, maybe my data point would be postcode of the customers. My insight might be that 80% of them live within 1 mile. My decision might be, okay, I'm not going to focus on billboards because I know that most of the people live locally, and I'll focus on delivery to capture those people from further afield. But the actual value provided is lowering that cost of acquisition by finding a channel that works better. So, questions to ask yourself if you're trying to provide insight and data. What decision does this data enable? If there's no decision, it's just numbers on a screen. Who will act on this and how? A dashboard that nobody opens is time and cost wasted, basically, because data is expensive. Data people salaries are expensive, and we can't forget that. What is the value in getting this right? So can you do some sort of heuristic estimation of revenue protected, cost reduced, or new revenue brought in from the data? Not always easy, but if you've got some baseline numbers, make a rough guesstimate, underestimate, and go from there. Does this generate more than our hourly rates as an agency? That's what we're always trying to think. If not, descope it, automate it, or don't do it. Internal people could think about this a little bit more, in my opinion. They don't realize that they're relatively expensive compared to a lot of other people. They don't have such hard targets on them. Often, data people are more expensive than marketing people, but marketing people are expected to bring in £1 million a year, and data people aren't. And it's the data person's job to help them to some degree. That's a little bit controversial, but I think it's true that they have less pressure on them. Can the client or can you yourself change something based on this? Insight, decision, action. All three must exist. If you can't change anything based on the data, it's a nice to know. So those have been my thoughts this week about the context of business. This is a nice, easy framework that you can easily apply when you've got insights and you're trying to make sure that they can be implemented in a practical way. Thanks very much for watching, and join me next week for another Gin with Gwynne.